So just to reiterate, the total that we have is 48 years for some 36 life sentences imposed for his offences, with an order that he serves a minimum of 30 years, 239 days. Let's get more with Mark White, who's outside Southwark Crown Court. As you were saying, Mark, no indication of the whole life tariff, and the judge explained why it didn't meet those tests. But bearing in mind his age, he will be spending most of the rest of his life behind bars.
Yes, it's that minimum tariff that is the crucial part of that sentence here, the time that he will have to spend in jail before he can be even considered as eligible for parole. So just over 30 years he will have to remain in prison before there's any prospect that he could be released. And as a man of 48, he's going to be almost 80 years of age before he is ever considered for release. So perfectly possible he may spend the rest of his life behind bars. I should just tell you that there is a disturbance happening outside the front of Southwark Crown Court. Not all that uncommon. Sometimes these things happen outside Crown Courts, but today of all days there have been protests here. But it appears to be a man who's trying to bash his way into the front door of the court. We're not sure if it's related to this ongoing case, but as I say, that very crucial minimum sentence, it was passed down more than 30 years for this former police officer who abused his position in the most appalling manner to try to cajole people in the first place, to go back to his home or hotels in some instances, and then, of course, to use his position as a police officer to coerce and to bully and intimidate these people into doing what he wanted and warn them off the prospect that or warn them off from trying to tell the authorities, because he was a member of the authorities. As I say, there are some difficult questions for the Metropolitan Police in this case as well to answer, because we know that there were 9 separate occasions where his offending behaviour came to authorities at the Metropolitan Police and were not properly acted on, or not acted on at all. And the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, has said that is certainly a matter for regret, and that the force is determined to make these vital improvements going forward. But I've been taking a look back at this case, at this serial rapist, this former police officer, and those very difficult questions that Scotland Yard now has to answer. As a Metropolitan Police officer, PC David Carrick was supposed to protect the public. Instead, he preyed on them, using his status as an armed officer to trick, control and silence his victims. A serial offender, he admitted to a staggering total of almost 50 offences, including 24 separate counts of rape. At Scotland Yard, the force may be under new management, but it is an all too familiar picture. A humiliating act of public contrition amid promises that the Met is focused on cleaning up its act.
We haven't applied the same sense of ruthlessness to guarding our own integrity that we routinely apply to confronting criminals, and I'm deeply sorry for that.
PC Carrick worked as a firearms officer in the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command, whose officers guard key buildings like Parliament, embassies and Downing Street. It's the unit where PC Wayne Couzens, another corrupt officer, served. He went on to kidnap, rape and murder marketing executive Sarah Everard in March 2021. The court heard how PC Carrick repeatedly humiliated his victims, locking some women in the understairs cupboard at his home here in Stevenage, or forcing them to clean his house naked, referring to his victims as slaves and telling them when they could eat and sleep. His crimes went undetected by the force he worked for, despite his behaviour being brought to the attention of senior officers on 9 separate occasions. In 2000, Carrick was accused of burglary and sending abusive messages. But the next year he passed the vetting procedures to join the Metropolitan Police. While serving, he was first accused of harassment and assault in 2002. He came to their attention again 2 years later after an alleged domestic incident. Despite a string of other allegations, none of them proven, he passed fresh vetting checks in 2017. In July 2021, he was placed on restricted duties after being arrested on suspicion of rape. But 2 months later, those restrictions were lifted after the charges were dropped. It was only in October that year that Carrick was finally suspended after prosecutors charged him following another allegation of rape at this hotel in St Albans by a woman he'd met on a dating app.
An absolute shocking case, this one.
Policing analyst Graham Wetton said this appalling breach of trust underlines the urgent need to change the standards and the culture within the UK's biggest police force.
This was a dreadful case, and it has to be a priority for the new Commissioner and the management team to address the issues with the Met, restore trust and confidence by looking at any offending that's gone on and root these people out of policing.
PC David Carrick's crimes have had a devastating impact on the lives of his victims. But the failure of his commanding officers to act far sooner has destroyed the trust of many others within the wider community. Mark White, GB News at Scotland Yard.
Let's return to Mark now. Mark, we have to warn people, as you're saying, there's quite a lot of disturbance there outside Southwark Crown Court at the moment. But let's reflect the judge indicating that Carrick had attempted to kill himself on remand in Belmarsh and then detained at a secure hospital, found not to be suffering from mental disorder, said Mrs Justice Chima Grubb. Driven to try to commit suicide as a self-pitying reaction, she said. But clearly now the question as to where he will be incarcerated, given this position as a former police officer.
Yes, there will have to be an assessment of his mental health state going forward as to whether there is any potential for him to try to do that and take his own life again. This was in July of last year while he was being held at Belmarsh Prison. According to the judge, he tried to kill himself using a razor blade. So he was taken to Rampton Psychiatric Unit where he has been for a number of months undergoing assessment and treatment. And as I say, that assessment will be ongoing because clearly if there is any potential for this former police officer to cause himself harm, then that will have to be taken into consideration. But yes, you are right in also highlighting that as a former police officer, it will be difficult for him in prison, no matter what his mental health, because he was a police officer and of course also someone convicted of the most appalling sexual acts, and we know that in prison those convicted of sexual offences don't have an easy time of it. Former police officers certainly don't have an easy time of it, and the judge alluded to that in her remarks, saying that he will have many difficult years ahead of him in prison, clearly as a former police officer and in light of the offences that he admitted to. Going forward, Mark, we have this former police officer out of the force and now in jail. But we have, according to the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, so Mark Rowley, fairly new in post, hundreds of others that he believes should not be serving still within the Metropolitan Police, people that have been or are subject to disciplinary proceedings. So going forward, it will certainly be of note to find out what Sir Mark Rowley is planning to do with regard to those who are still within that police service.